That 5.7 V8 sounds amazing. And unfortunately, an inline-6 twin-turbo engine is just not going to sound like that. What is going on today, guys? My name is Alex. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about something a little bit interesting. Well, actually pretty interesting. Ram has claimed that they are going to replace the 5.7 HEMI and potentially the 6.4 HEMI with a brand new inline-6 twin-turbo engine. So we are going to talk about that today, and I'm going to give you my opinion on what I think about this potential new HEMI replacement engine. So right behind me, we have my 2022 Ram 2500 Power Wagon with the 6.4 HEMI. And behind me here, we got some nice old trucks. We're in my good friend's shop here, and I figured, what a great place to talk about some new engines. So it does seem like the rumors are true. The 5.7 HEMI and potentially the 6.4 HEMI are going right into the garbage. And it looks like a 3.0 inline-6 twin turbo engine, nicknamed the Hurricane, from Stellantis, is going to replace the HEMIs in any longitudinal vehicles, meaning basically any vehicle that has an engine that's normally mounted. So your front of the engine's here, the back of the engine's here. It's not mounted horizontally. Now, it's not 100% confirmed, but it does seem like that is going to be the future plans of FAC or Chrysler Canada anyways. Now, before I give you my opinion on that engine as a heavy-duty mechanic, let's just dive into the engine itself, and I'll give you guys the details and just the general overview of what this new engine is all about. So Stellantis is out of Mexico. Well, at least that's where they're going to be producing these engines, and there are two types of these engines. There's going to be a low output and a high output engine. I figured we start with the low output engine and just go over the basics for that. So the low output 3.0 liter engine is rumored to have about 400 horsepower and 425 foot-pounds of torque. So plenty of power. The cylinder block and the cylinder head are going to be cast aluminum, and Stellantis has claimed they are going to use plasma transfer technology to actually spray the cylinder walls with a thin coat of iron, which is going to save about 3 pounds per cylinder, which is, again, kind of interesting. The compression ratio of the low output engine is going to be 10.4 to 1. There's going to be about 22.4 psi of boost available. It's going to have a max redline of 5,800 RPM. This engine can run on 87 octane, which is a big point, which I'll get into in the high output version. With an inline-6, what's important to remember, at least important for a truck, is that usually it is an under square engine, and this engine is no different. The stroke, which is how far the piston goes down, is bigger than the actual bore of the piston, meaning an under square engine. And naturally, simply with the mechanical leverage these engines have, they are going to be torque monsters, and they're going to produce torque very easily. So that is a good thing. This inline-6 is also going to be direct injection, meaning that fuel is directly injected into the cylinder, which is pretty cool. This engine is also going to be a double overhead cam. Again, pretty interesting stuff, as well as the twin turbos are going to have a broad torque band. They claim that between 2,300 RPM and a redline, you will be able to maintain 90% of peak torque in that kind of torque band. And then there is going to be a water to air intake cooler. Basically, when you have turbos, the air gets compressed, and when air gets compressed, it gets very hot, so you need to cool it back down. Most vehicles use an air-to-air cooler. This engine is going to use an air-to-water cooler, basically meaning that it's going to cool the turbo air with engine coolant. So that's kind of the quick notes on the low output inline-6 engine. Kind of interesting. I'm actually a little bit excited about that, but let's dive into the high output version and see why it's different. So the high output version shares the same aluminum block and shares the same cylinder and bore dimensions. However, it does have a different head, which allows for more airflow. It's got bigger turbos, as well as all forged internals. It's got forged aluminum pistons, forged crankshaft, forged rods. It is a much beefier engine. As well, from stock, you're gonna be able to run more boost 26 pounds of boost versus 22.4. So this engine is ready to take more abuse. The high output version is also going to have a larger water to air cooler, allowing for more turbo air to be cooled, which is always a good thing. This engine is also going to rev a little bit higher. Redline is at 6,100 RPM versus 5,800 RPM. There is going to be a more aggressive cam profile, as well as a heavier duty oil pump and a heavier duty fuel system, which is going to really help this engine in towing situations so that you don't end up running lean. Now, when I was reading this kind of is a little bit of a big piece of information, because if they are getting ready for this engine to be towing consistently, it may in fact indicate that the 6.4 HEMI in the heavy duty lineup, 2500, 3500s, may be out the door. So we'll have to see about that. Now, this high output engine has to run on 91 octane fuel, which in my opinion is not good. And I will dive into that later in the video. But just remember that high output engine has to run on premium fuel. Now, with all those improvements in the high output version, they claim that this engine is going to be about 500 horsepower, 500 plus horsepower, with about 475 foot-pounds of torque. So it is going to be a very powerful power plant, and I imagine it will be a very quick engine. Whether or not it is a good towing engine is, a whole different ball game. Overall, I think that the high output and the low output versions of these Inline-6 are pretty interesting engines, and I would be very excited to drive one in a Ram 1500 or Ram 2500 and see how they feel. Not only is this Inline-6 engine supposed to replace the V8, the 3.6 liter Pentastar is going to also be replaced. So there are a lot of vehicles that are going to have this new Inline-6 engine in it, and this is going to be a very big platform for Chrysler as well as Ram. So I guess you guys are now wondering what my thoughts are. I figured we'd start with the pros of this Inline-6 twin turbo engine. So number one, which I think is really cool about these engines, is the tunability. The fact that you have a twin turbo direct injection engine means that these engines are probably going to be easily tuned to make more power, which is kind of cool. In comparison to, let's say, the 5.7, which is a naturally aspirated V8, there really is no tunability for those engines. I mean, there is, but really there is not. Like, if you want to actually get power out of the 5.7, you have to add bolt-ons. It's kind of how it works. Whereas a direct injection twin turbo Inline-6, I mean, simply with a tune, you can probably make a lot of power out of these engines, especially with the high output that has all forged internals. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if guys are making like 600, 700 horse just with a tune, which is kind of cool. Like diesels are very tunable, I feel like if these engines were to go in a heavy duty truck, you could simply put some bigger turbos on there, and I bet you can make a lot of power out of this engine. So that is exciting to me. The other cool thing about this engine is the fact that it's simply just an Inline-6. Now, I briefly talked about how Inline-6s are very good at making torque. So let's dive into that. Diesel engines are mostly Inline-6s because they make great torque, and torque is good for towing, for pulling. So the fact that this engine is Inline-6 is pretty exciting. Like I said, it is an undersquare engine, basically meaning that the piston stroke is bigger than the actual bore size. And what that means is it has a mechanical advantage of that long crank throw, and that allows for this engine to make torque very easily, and it's going to make a lot of torque. Now, V6 engines have been very popular in the last, I'm going to say 20 years, and an Inline-6 engine is a different beast. I mean, this is not an EcoBoost V6 twin turbo. This is an Inline-6 twin turbo engine, and Inline-6 engines are very, very torquey. So I think it will surprise people how efficiently these engines will pull things. Now, the third thing that I think could be a benefit is the fuel economy. However, I will dive into that in great depth in a second here. But lastly, I think this engine will come with new technology, new improvements. So it's never a bad thing that Ram's coming out with a new platform of engine. And I think with this kind of, I'm going to call it political environment, the fact that FAC Ram has come out with an internal combustion engine for a new platform for a while, I think is a good thing, because they could have come out with, a more hybrid electric engine platform, which, I feel like a lot of you guys probably wouldn't be that excited about. So all in all, I am excited for this new engine to come out, but I think there are some concerns. Now, number one, fuel economy. Stellantis claims that this engine will be 15% more fuel efficient than the 5.7 HEMI. Now, I would imagine that figure is for the low output version of this Inline-6, which would make sense. The problem with turbos on a gas engine is the fact that a gas engine needs to have a very specific fuel to air ratio. It's called a stoichiometric ratio. I believe it's 14.7 to 1, whereas a diesel engine does not need that. You can shove as much air as you want into the diesel and it loves running lean, whereas a fuel engine cannot do that. So the more air you shove into an engine, the more fuel you have to shove into that engine as well. So if at any point one of these engines was under some kind of load and those turbos had to spool up and really, send that boost into the engine, that extra air has to be met with extra fuel. So pickup trucks are naturally heavy vehicles, and I could imagine, even if you were faced with a decent headwind, those turbos are probably going to be spooled up and shoving boost into those cylinders, and that is going to be met with extra fuel. So I think that would probably dramatically decrease your fuel economy. I know with the 3.5 liter Ford EcoBoost engines, if there was any load on those engines, fuel economy was basically not that good. So the rough number for the fuel economy for the Inline-6 is 17 miles per gallon in the city and 24 miles per gallon on the highway, which is not that bad. Now the 5.7 puts out 15 miles per gallon in the city and 21 miles per gallon on the highway. So it is a little bit higher, but the high output version of this Inline-6 is only rumored to be about 1 mile per gallon more efficient than the 5.7 HEMI. But I'm sure some of you guys are saying, well, it's got 500 plus horsepower in comparison to 395 horsepower. So still having greater fuel economy while still having, an extra 100 plus horsepower is enticing. However, there is a catch. The high output version has to run with 91 octane fuel. So it has to run with premium fuel, which I think is a huge mistake made by Chrysler, because let's be honest, people who buy Ram pickup trucks are not the type of people who pay for premium fuel. I'm sorry. And if you're going to put the high output version in a pickup truck, I just don't think people are going to be happy paying for premium fuel. And, talk about fuel cost. Maybe it's slightly more fuel efficient, but at the end of the day, if it costs more money to fill it with fuel than the 5.7 HEMI, people are not going to be happy. So I'm very wary about the quote-unquote increased fuel economy. Next up is reliability. Now, an Inline-6 engine is naturally very well balanced, so the engine and internals itself will most likely be a pretty reliable engine. However, there are twin turbos strapped to this engine, which are kind of going to be in a very tight area, and there's going to be a lot of potential things that go wrong. First of all is the water to air cooler. Why they just didn't put an air to air cooler, I would imagine it has something to do with space, but an air to air cooler is just a much simpler unit and less things to go wrong. Now, twin turbos. So a turbo has an oil feed and an oil drain, as well as a coolant feed and a coolant drain, and there's two of them. So that's gonna be a lot of lines going to your twin turbos, and all those lines in there can all fail So there is maybe going to be some reliability questions here. Not to mention that, you know, a naturally aspirated V8 engine like the 5.7 is a pretty simple engine. In terms of reliability, obviously we know the 5.7 is not a perfect engine, but in terms of its low-end strength, you rarely hear about a 5.7 or even a 6.4 HEMI having, you know, low-end failures. It's a 4-bolt main. They're very strong engines. Obviously, we know about the valve train issues, aka the HEMI tick. Those issues, I think, are probably a little bit overblown. It is an issue, but I think they're a little bit overblown. Whereas, you know, this new inline-6 twin-turbo engine, there is going to be a lot of componentry, and those components are going to have to be very precise. You know, you're going to have 20 plus pounds of boost being shoved into this engine, and it just leads for a lot of things to go wrong potentially. And if we look at the past engines Chrysler has released, aka the Eco Diesel, those have not been great examples of reliability. So until I see and hear about these engines being actually reliable, I will have my doubts. My next big question is, are they planning to put these inline-6 twin-turbo engines in the heavy-duty lineup? I'm very curious, and I could not find the details online, and maybe someone out there knows if they are actually planning on replacing the 6.4 HEMI and offering this new inline-6 engine in the heavy-duty platform. So I'm not too sure about that, but if they do, I think that may be a little bit of a mistake. Again, we'll have to see about reliability, but these heavy-duty trucks are often bought as work units, you know, company trucks, and they get beat on. And I would imagine they would put the high output version in this truck so you can tow more and so forth. But it seems like this engine is much more of a you know, performance type of engine, not necessarily a low-end grunt engine that can just be beat on. So I would be worried if they did put this engine in the heavy-duty lineup. It just would not stand the test of time getting beat on like these heavy-duty trucks do. Now, the fourth con is super simple. It is simply the sound. I mean, the 5.7 HEMI is the best sounding naturally aspirated V8 engine offered in a pickup truck today. I know some of you guys might hate hearing that, but it is the frickin' truth. Like, it is just such a good, snappy sounding engine. And well, let me put a clip in here of my old truck. That 5.7 V8 sounds amazing, and unfortunately an inline-6 twin-turbo engine is just not going to sound like that. It's going to sound very muffled because it has the turbos right there at the exhaust manifolds, and it's going to have a much different sound, and I think people may not appreciate that. And I think a lot of people just love that naturally aspirated V8 sound, and you know, the Ram trucks are just no longer going to have that, which is a little bit sad. Now, my last point is, do the consumers actually want this? And I think this is a very valid question. I would be concerned if, you know, let's say Dodge ran a survey on current pickup truck owners. Do they want an inline-6 engine, or are they happy with their current V8s? And I would think 90% of them, maybe not, but I would say a lot of them would be very happy with their 5.7s. I mean, I know personally with my old truck, I had the 5.7 with the 8-speed transmission, as well as the 321 gears and the multi-cylinder displacement, basically shutting down the engine to 4 cylinders. Was an extremely fuel efficient truck. On the highway, I'd be running like 21 miles per gallon out of a, you know, 5.7 V8 pickup truck. So it was very efficient, and I think a lot of people really like the 5.7 HEMI. Lots of power, yet can still be very efficient. So, you know, it's interesting. Do the consumers want to have an inline-6 twin-turbo engine with potentially not that much upside. So those are all questions I think, Ram and Chrysler need to ask themselves instead of just kind of shoving this engine down people's throats and not giving them an option of V8. Now, who knows if they're going to completely take away the V8 option, but I think the writing's on the wall. I think that is kind of the plan. So only time will tell. So to conclude, until we get our hands on these engines, we're never really going to know. We can only speculate, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Pure speculation. Who knows? Maybe these engines actually turn out to be fantastic platforms and produce tons of power and are extremely reliable and great towing engines. But until it is proven to me, I will have my doubts, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have the same doubts. So we'll leave it at that, and I cannot wait to get behind the steering wheel of a Ram 1500 or 2500 with one of these engines and, tell you guys what I think. Anyways, if you guys like the video, don't forget to leave that thumbs up, and if you like cool stuff like this, don't forget to subscribe. But as always, we'll see you in the next freaking video.